Following episode of Critical Weeb Theory has some pretty heavy content warnings. Sexism, abuse, sexual assault, homophobia, and suicide. There'll also be some pretty mild spoilers to Wonder Egg Priority and Jujutsu Kaisen, and some more moderate spoilers of Redo of Healer. Enjoy!
This is not a problem I have when I talk about things I absolutely despise. We're gonna get to those, and we can very cleanly break apart what bad shows do bad, but I feel like it's probably a problem with me that I can't fully encapsulate why I love Wonder Egg Priority so much.
Nah, I think one of the best things about Wonder Egg Priority is that I feel like every person who watches this is going to have an experience in their own life that they relate to, and that experience is going to be different than the other person. And so because of that, how egg affects them is going to be really different.
Hello. Did you miss us? We missed you, nebulous reviewer. That's right. We're building parasocial relationships here and further incentivizing the hellhole to which our world is following, in which we never know who are or aren't our friends. I'm Raghavan. My pronouns are anything other than he or she.
And I'm Mo. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I'm a little bit concerned about how we started this podcast, but you know what? It is absolutely wonderful to be back. I can say that.
Did you know we almost named this The Hot Take? Thank God we didn't. Critical Weeb Theory is so much better.
Critical Weeb Theory. Because I think the thing about the podcast is just the podcast name is that we just had to come up with a name, right? And we were like, what is it? And we were this close to just calling it Hot Takes. But then I think it was you that was just Critical Weeb Theory. And I was like, Critical Weeb Theory. And you were like, Critical Weeb Theory. And then it's just, it's what we went with. Beautiful.
It is not just what we went with. It is our soul, our identity. It is the song of which we are the notes of. I'm going to stop talking now. We're going to start talking about anime.
Right, but just real quick on Critical Weeb Theory. By the time this episode is released, we should be on Podbean and iTunes. I just wanted to thank everyone who subscribed to my Patreon recently, because you guys literally made the difference between having this up on a podcasting service or not. I know it doesn't really seem much, $5, $1, $15, but it actually is. It was the difference, and I'm just really happy that this podcast is actually growing to, or not necessarily growing, but reaching the people who would be interested in it. So thank you so much. Let's move on to our first topic of the day. And that topic is egg. Hey. Let's talk about fucking egg. Let's do it.
If you haven't heard about Wonder Egg Priority, I wonder.
You wonder?
I was trying to make a pun. Yeah, it didn't work out. Anyway, I highly recommend it. Show's great. It's very heavy.
It is a current winter 2021 show.
It's about children dealing with abuse.
Yeah.
So,
let's just get the premise out of the way first, and then we will go into all the reasons why we not only love this show, but it is despite not having seen any of the other shows that this year has to offer, it is pretty easily up there for animated year.
Yeah, and we're going to try to keep the spoiler free as best as we can.
Oh yeah,
but you really should just, if you haven't seen it, you should just stop watching this episode and go watch Wonder Egg and then come back Don't worry, we're not offended.
Okay. Wonder Egg Priority, it stars a high schooler named Ai, who's kind of, she's gone hikikomori after she lost her best friend to suicide. And when she goes to sleep, she enters a dream world where she's given an egg, and when she cracks the egg, someone is hatched from the egg, and they're basically dealing with some sort of form of trauma and abuse, and I needs to protect this kind of person from the form of abuse that they experience as soon as they hatch. And then she needs to work together with this person to defeat like the central trauma in this person's life. And yeah, that's kind of like every episode there's another egg. They gotta crack it. They gotta figure out what the trauma is and how to hit it really hard, and also like how to understand it. Yeah, I feel like that is the most description I can do before we start getting into spoilers, and we're going to try and keep this spoiler free.
What makes Egg so good is that its characters are incredibly well written and well defined, and that the way they react and behave in response to the various trauma inflicted upon them is natural in a way.
If we want to break down what makes Wonder Egg Priority so good, I think it's generally three main things. It's character interactions, so like the little moments between the characters that kind of sell them as like real and absolutely adorable people, who you would like, who you could actually imagine existing in like reality. This is I think a big problem with anime, is that a lot of the time you get character archetypes, right? And these archetypes are while recognizable and familiar, they don't feel like people. They feel like androids, like firing off a script, right? So if somebody's like the tsundere archetype, then she's gonna be like, I don't like you, and then she's gonna blush, and then she's gonna be like, but I do like him, and then she's gonna get mad whenever he does anything, whenever she gets embarrassed, and at the end of the day, she's gonna like, there's gonna be some like big moment, and she's gonna go, yeah, blah, 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 right? And there are characters in the show that I think are like cold and like kind of hot-headed and stuff like that. And probably in a general sense, I'm not saying we'll like never see a tsundere, or we'll never see like any other archetypes that we have. But what I am saying is that they're not gonna feel like that. They're just gonna feel like you have whatever other girl she's with, and it's just gonna feel like I and this other person, and that is something I appreciate. The second one is just how the show looks. It looks really good. So I want you to think about like your favorite anime, and I want you to think about like the scene, right? Like the scene where the animators and the storyboarders and the voice actors, and they all just came together and they put all of their budget and all of their effort just to deliver like 30 seconds to 1 minute of like pure mastery on the screen. Wonder Egg Priority is that, but all the time. Just all the time. It is at its baseline level of quality is every other show's like try hard level of quality in terms of just the way it like looks and feels. Like the sound design is spectacular. When you watch the show, you just I do if you follow me on Twitter, I do like reaction threads to Wonder Egg Priority, and I feel like I mean I'm doing the thread for you guys, so like I try my best to like give like what would be like, I guess, useful insight into the show, or just like how I feel, or just like react. But it is actually really hard for me to react to the show, because the show it naturally doesn't want you to pause and comment on it. It just wants you to experience it. Right. Because it is at that level of quality where you just kind of sit and like your mouth is kind of like open a little, like agape, like, holy shit, the show is fantastic. Right. The final thing is like the way it handles like deep topics. Like, it is incredibly mature. For a show about a bunch of high schoolers just kind of like bumbling through life, it understands people and it has things to say about things. So it's doing things and stuff, you know, like I say on Twitter.
I wanted to say something about this here. What I think
Yeah, absolutely.
Wonder Egg Priority does really well, and perhaps more importantly, does at all, is it tells these stories about the abuse leveled against young girls from the perspective of those people. And
Yes.
I think it's very important because a lot of times, if these stories are included at all, they're included as side stories, and if they are included as side stories, and again, obviously there are definitely other anime that do this, and very possibly other anime I haven't seen that do this, but most of the time, conversations surrounding, these sorts of heavy topics are generally focused the protagonist who's not directly involved in these topics, who is not themselves the survivor of abuse, and thus it is always like an outside looking in perspective and not one that truly understands the complexities of the subject matter or what it does to people.
Right. Or just like, it never forces you to be in the position of the victim, right? I was thinking as a comparison, we could look at something like Sword Art Online and the way it handles abuse, which is poorly, constantly, all the time, much to my chagrin, right? But like Sword Art Online will usually have like a woman or like a girl or something like be abused or attacked, and then it's always, I would say with the exception of like season 2, but like, it's fine. But it's basically always, somebody is, assaulted, and then the person you're empathizing with is the person that saves her. Right. And so you never really get, like, even if the show says, which SAO does say, that like assault is bad and abuse is bad, right? You don't hear that from the woman. You hear it from the other male characters. And so it's almost as if like we're like anti-sexist, or we're against the assault of like non-men because it's good for us, right? Well, good for not us between like the two of us, but like us between like me and like other men, right? But it's like, no, that's not why. It's like we want to create a world that's like better for everybody, and part of that needs to be hearing these kinds of stories written by and for and centering the people who are actually being attacked, right? And so the way Wonder Egg Priority like puts you in the position of like, there's an episode I sort of want to talk about, but I'll do it without spoilers. There's one person in an episode who's like abused by like a mentor, and she, when she's around she talks about how she's always like being yelled at, she's being hit, she's being like berated for her body, right? But then when she's in the presence of her mentor, she kind of folds and she like blames herself for everything. And she says, yes, you're right. Yes, I know you love me. Yes, I know that you're doing everything for my sake. Yes, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. And you're like in the position like where I think if people have experienced this sort of like treatment, the thing that happens when like when you're abused, like the abuser like rewrites, your thoughts, right? they control how you think about yourself, which is probably one of the scariest things that happens. And this show just does it absolutely perfect. I think one thing that we can talk about is like detail. So do you remember the one scene where Ai's like she's on the phone basically, and like there's this one scene where like Ai is like talking to someone through a speaker, and she can't really hear him, and she can't really hear what she's saying. And like in a normal show, this would really not be that big of like a deal visually, because it's simply like a plot point. She's trying to talk to someone and she can't talk to someone. But the way Egg treats the show, and this little moment, it's like you can see her. She's like struggling to hear. She like moves in, she moves closer, she moves back and forth. She kind of bobs around. She kind of taps at the speaker, right? And it's just, even in these moments that are like purely functional, like, okay, we only need this scene to tell people how the plot works, and we only need this scene to move to a different scene. Like, Egg will like use it to tell you more about character, and that's just it's art. It's art. Like all anime is art, but this is like art. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Like art in the sense that it is just astoundingly beautiful.
I feel like every time I try to say something about why it is so meaningful or impactful in analytic manner, all I end up saying is like, just watch Wonder Egg Priority. It's very, 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 very good. And this is not a problem I have when I talk about things I absolutely despise. We're gonna get to those, and we can very cleanly break apart what bad shows do bad. But I feel like it's probably a problem with me that I can't like fully encapsulate why I love Wonder Egg Priority so much.
Nah, I think one of the best things about Wonder Egg Priority is that I feel like every person who watches this is going to have like an experience in their own life that they relate to, and that experience is going to be different than the other person. And so because of that, how Egg affects them is going to be really different. And I am excited for when Egg ends and everyone I've been calling it Egg Twitter, but basically me and a bunch of the people I follow and a bunch of the people who follow me, who all just have eggs in the bio on Twitter because of fucking Wonder Egg Priority. It's Egg Twitter now. But anyway, I can't wait for, basically everyone's gonna have like a different take, and it is going to be like really emotional and beautiful to see like what people have to say and like what people have to write. I don't know. It's not usually the type of show that I analyze, because it's like, I feel like people want more like ideology and like political stuff from me.
Yeah.
But it is nonetheless just like, it's going to be an anime that like people remember. It's going to be an anime that like affects people, and that's like, when you're making art, that's all you want, right? That at the end of the day, like, to make an impact on someone else.
Yeah.
If we weren't doing a spoiler free segment, I think we'd have a lot more to talk about.
We would, but I know people are something.
This is just us telling you to watch Egg.
It is.
The other winter 2020 anime. Listen, next to Egg, there isn't really a whole lot that like compares, and that's not like really slandering winter 2020. Winter 2020 it's a fairly alright season for the most part.
It must have at least one other good show. I'm only watching Egg because it is in my nature to only watch one thing this season. Last season I watched 2 things, which was a pretty marked improvement, to be honest. But
I mean, we sort of like, we watched JJK for a bit until like Akudama Drive and Moriarty the Patriot were a lot more interesting than JJK.
JJK is still good though. Jujutsu Kaisen is a thing I'm still having fun with. I would, in talking about Jujutsu Kaisen, I would note again that it is definitely like a problematic phase, because for everything it does that's like really, really good, there is something else it does that is
kind of, yeah.
It's
kind of like, dang, I really wish you weren't doing this right now.
There's some like, if Fridge was a character ones that I really wish it didn't do. But overall, it is still like a well within my tolerance level. And when it's popping off, it's anyway, Jujutsu Kaisen is really good. Episode 15 was the highlight of Jujutsu Kaisen for me. Not because I think episode 15 was the best episode, but because whoever like did the soundtrack for episode 15 like really nailed it. The soundtrack was good enough that I made Mo let us watch it twice.
Yeah, we watched it two times in a row, and we were temporarily not friends because I wouldn't watch it a third time in a row.
I just need someone to release
okay.
the Jujutsu Kaisen soundtrack specifically for episode 15 alone, and will be a very happy person because it was very good. There were some really nice tracks on it.
Jujutsu Kaisen, it does have, like, I can't say it's like a socialist or like basically theory sort of story, but it's got some leftist undertones to it, especially with like Nanami Kento. There's a salaryman in the show Nanami Kento, who's apparently supposed to be a villain. This is like interesting information. He was supposed to be a villain who he works for a consulting firm. He helps rich clients make more money on the stock market and stuff like that, right?
He worked.
And he
no longer.
Yeah, worked, and no longer works. And he's a sorcerer, mm-hmm. right? But when he worked at the consulting firm, he hated his job. He made a lot of money, but waking up every day, going to sleep, doing something that he rightly characterizes as like not useful to society.
Yeah, I think what really tells me a lot about Jujutsu Kaisen's priorities is when Nanami Kento describes that his former job as a stock market broker, was to make rich people even richer, and yet his job, which is further removed from the natural cycle of life than that of a baker, is somehow paid more. Right? And I think
he says something to the effect of like, if every baker disappeared, there would be like, everyone would notice because that's where their food comes from. But if every stockbroker disappeared, literally no one would care. Yeah.
Because stockbroking is like removed from like the things people do that matter in their lives.
And that was like really good, and it was a really welcome addition to a show that was already strong.
Nanami Kento was already the best character from the moment he was introduced.
Easily.
And he continues to be the best character in every subsequent moment.
Mm-hmm. I would say my running contention with Jujutsu Kaisen is that I can't see Nobara do things. Okay, listen. Nobara was introduced. She's like the female lead. She was introduced in episode 3. And she had a really cool fight sequence in that episode. Where her powers are like using needles and like cursed energy to defeat her opponents. And she's basically like, she's got a really interesting motivation of just like, she's like a country girl and she just wants to like live in the city. And then she figured, oh, okay, I can do this sorcery shit just so I can like move to Tokyo and stuff, right? Like that's like her whole thing. And her personality is just really, I think personally she's like really lovable and like a well-rounded and fleshed out character. But ever since episode 3, we haven't seen... Yeah, she does. But since episode 3, we haven't seen her do things. We're told she's doing things
and do we see the aftermath of her having done things?
Yeah.
And it's
But we don't get to see her. Like, male characters will get, like, an extended, like, fight sequence. They'll get, like on-screen character development and stuff like that. And, like, weirdly enough, Novara will just cut to her after a fight or before a fight or something. And then we're going to be told that, oh, she was training really hard and stuff like that. And
it's not even true, I think, just for male characters. There are, like, other female characters who get to fight, but
yeah,
I think in the latest episode, the fight between Mila and Maki was, like, there for a bit, but not really. While the fight between Panda and Mekamaru, which, don't get me wrong, that was really cool. Speaking of which,
and by the way, that fight was...
You're great.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. But that fight was absolutely exceptional, though. It was a really good fight, and it had a lot to say about, like, I can't say how good it was, but it tried to say things about, like, disability. It had a lot to say about just, like, what these two characters are, like, doing, and, like, how they, like, view life and stuff. It was really good. But, like, why are you doing this at the expense of the female characters, you know? I want to see them, too. You got me invested in them. I want a return on that investment. That's all. Oh, no. It's redo time.
Yep.
Ew. Okay, redo of Healer is by far the worst shit I have ever seen.
I want to start. Before we really get into redo of Healer. 1, yes, it's bad. 2, yes, we know, it's bad. The reason I think it's important to break down why redo of Healer is bad is 1, because redo of Healer is popular, and it's going to be popular in spite of what we do about it, for worse.
Absolutely.
Until it is forgotten.
This is the number 1 trending show in Japan. Incredibly popular in the United States.
Yeah. So on that note, I feel like if it is already popular, we're not making it any more popular by talking about it, and so we at least have an obligation to, like, look into it.
It's gonna get, like, what?
Break it down.
500 views on a good day? Like,
And
okay.
One of the things we're going to be trying to talk about here, if you've been following Mo's Twitter at all, he's said this a couple of times, but there is definitely a big part of redo of Healer's popularity is this sort of manufactured outrage, where people explicitly prop up redo of Healer because it makes the environment hostile to anyone, to, like, basically everyone. When I watch redo of Healer with Mo, because I don't think anyone should have to watch the show alone, I find it incredibly triggering, and I'm basically deeply uncomfortable the entire time, just because of, like, the depth of abuse and assault being, like, brought up in the show, right? And so by saying, like, this is the anime and making it incredibly prevalent in anime spaces, it makes the...
Like, this is the anime that proves that you are, like, some savant of, like, anime culture, right? Like, it's this one.
It is, to put it lightly...
We haven't actually described what happened.
Well, we'll get there, but it makes it very gatekeeping. The other thing I want to note is what we discuss in Redo of Healer isn't in any way, shape, or form unique to Redo of Healer. And I think in many cases, talking about the most extreme example of a problematic trope makes the more subtle examples more recognizable. With that being said, you want to talk about Redo of Healer?
Alright, Redo of Healer. Yeah, let's go. So there, if I did this correctly, there will be content warnings at the beginning of this episode. But this is, although Redo of Healer, it's kind of funny in the sense that Like, it's just such an off the wall show. It is like deeply hateful and deeply disturbing. So I want to reiterate, we're talking about assault, we're talking about abuse, we're talking about homophobia, we're talking about basically anything that could ruin your day is here. So if you're like in a bad spot right now, please just, it's okay. Thanks for listening this far. I do love you. Take care of yourself. So Redo of Healer, it stars a protagonist. I won't bother remembering their names. It's fine. But it essentially stars a protagonist in a fantasy setting who is essentially recruited by the royal military or whatever to become a hero, right? And it turns out he has an incredible aptitude for healing magic, right? So he becomes a hero at first, thinking that he gets to heal people, he gets to travel the world, he gets lots of money, blah blah blah. But he quickly realizes two things. Thing number one, whenever he heals people, he also gets the trauma of all of their wounds, right? So if you got your arm chopped off, he can heal your arm, but he feels like he just got his arm chopped off, right? And he feels all those emotions that were attached to it. Number two, and this is perhaps the more important thing, the people who adopt him from the royal capital are abusers. They physically abuse him because they don't consider a healer to be like useful, right. Even though he heals all their wounds and objectively makes their party stronger. I'll get into this. Okay.
So one thing I really want to say very early on here is that when we say that the protagonist of Redo of Healer is reprehensible and what he does is cruel and unjustified, that doesn't mean that he wasn't abused. In fact, Redo of Healer shows a very clear picture of very, sharp abuse.
It's deceptive, though,
the
right?
Issue
because
comes, the issue comes...
The abuse is only there so that you don't criticize the protagonist.
The abuse is there to justify the abuse inflicted upon the protagonist of Redo of Healer is there to justify the abuse he inflicts on others. We saw this with Shield Hero. We will see this again. It is very common in shows
a lot of these
that have toxic
these
ideologies,
controversial anime,
for example, fascism, need to be justified because no one's just down for what the protagonist of Redo of Healer does, which is completely brainwash a person and take away her agency.
We'll get to it. But even if you're talking about shows like that, like Goblin Slayer, right? Remember in the first episode of Goblin Slayer, there's the scene where all the goblins sexually assault a pretty white lady, right? And the purpose of that is to establish the goblins as so unbelievably reprehensible that essentially committing genocide against them is a perfectly fine and okay thing to do, right? Which is what the Goblin Slayer, and as the name implies, what he ends up doing.
And again, we're not saying that in that show, Jenna, in that
the goblins
show,
weren't
perhaps,
bad, or whatever.
Right? Or that in that show, it wouldn't be logical to kill off the goblins. But rather, what we're pointing out is
you made up a situation which just genocide was justified.
Right.
Why?
Right.
Why'd you do that?
So it's not.
Why'd you feel the need?
Because it's not a morally neutral choice to write the goblins that way. Writing the goblins that way and depicting the other that way is itself the point we are critiquing. And here in Redo of Healer, again, we are critiquing why did you set it up such that.
Exactly. So I'll continue with the summary real quick. The hero at first the protagonist at first he is made dependent on like a special addictive drug, to the point where he kind of he loses his mind and he will do anything to get more of the drug. And then he's sexually assaulted by not just the leader of the party, who's a princess, to the royal capital. Of course, we'll talk about that. He's assaulted by a lot of the other female adventurers who need his bodily fluids to gain XP. Yeah, that's another thing. He when you ingest his bodily fluids, you gain benefits, but only if you're a woman. The men also rape him, but they do it because they're gay. And surprise, the author hates gay people. This was confirmed, I think, in a tweet from the author himself. But yeah, it doesn't. Like, we have evidence in the show, but like the author has basically said that like homosexuality is like widespread throughout this kingdom, and that's why all the male knights just want to like rape people, because that's what he thinks of gay and lesbian people, unfortunately. So anyway, in his party, he gets that a lot. He's physically beaten. He's sexually taken advantage of. He's treated like trash day in, day out, every day. So what he does is he spends the next few months while he's being abused learning all kinds of powers and tricks to heal things. It gets a little out of control. He has an instant kill healing, corruption healing. I don't know how. He has a healing that can transform his body parts to gain other people's powers. He has a teleportation healing, I guess. He has all sorts of healing powers that do not heal whatsoever, but he learns them anyway. And he becomes quite literally one of the most powerful beings in this world. He kills the demon lord, because there's always a demon lord, and he uses a special artifact, and he says, I'm going to go back in time, I'm going to heal the world and go back in time, so that now I can exact my revenge, right, on all the people who raped and abused me, right? So he goes back in time, and then he basically sets himself on a path. He does most of these events again. Then the first thing he does is he rapes the princess who abused him. Then he brainwashes her and makes her his servant. Then he buys a slave, and now he's going on a rampage to try and get the other people in the party who abused him. The other two, of course, one's a lesbian and the other's a gay guy, and they both physically and sexually assaulted him. So he's going after them next. That's the state of Redo for the time being. Let's unpack, because there's quite a few things here.
I guess the first thing I want to unpack is it's very easy to break apart the logical inconsistencies of Redo of Healer, because the show makes no sense. Healing in Redo of Healer is not healing by any conventional means. The protagonist talks like he's the weakest character in the world, even though he's very obviously the strongest, and
because he's the strongest, it wouldn't make sense for anyone else to even treat him the way they do. If they know anything about healing and its potentials.
And even if they do, they just come off as irrational and delusional in the way they dismiss the healing, but none of those are really the problems with Redo of Healer. And I feel like in hyperfixating on those problems in specific, you fall into a trap where it almost starts to seem like if Redo of Healer were more competently written, it would be okay, but it's not. It's just terrible, and also poorly written. The last point, I think, is of interest because it is the way Reader of Healer frames hatred, where the hatred levied against the protagonist is irrational and unjustified. Because he does everything he's asked, and it's always good, and they hate him and abuse him anyway. Whereas the hatred he levels against the others in order to abuse them and subjugate and, do very fascisty things, because where Shield Hero was, a libertarian ANCAP nightmare, a Jujutsu Healer is definitely more of a authoritarian bent.
Yeah, it's to be honest, it's like the oldest trick in the fucking bad anime book. Like, I've seen this like a million times, and so it gets me a little concerned when I see like the people who defend Redo of Healer like bringing up these arguments as if they like matter, or as if I haven't seen them, right? The show, first and foremost, and the reason why the bad logical things don't really matter is because the show, first and foremost, is a vehicle to justify sexual abuse. That's it. Like, I wrote about Shield Hero and how, like, the entire show, or at least the very beginning, like the first 4 episodes and like a couple episodes after that, like, those episodes are kind of they're built to do nothing else but to justify the master-slave relationship between Raphtalia and Naofumi, right? And likewise, with Redo of Healer, everything that is written in this show only exists to justify the scenes where the healer buys a slave, the healer rapes someone, the healer attacks someone, this and that. And you can kind of tell with how the story is set up, right? So, for example, when the healer goes back in time, he goes back in time to before he's been abused, right? So meaning, he's punishing people for crimes they have not committed yet, but rather for crimes they will commit, right? He decides at the beginning, to someone who at that point does not know him, that he's going to do this and that. He could just as easily decide, nah, I'm going to go back in time, and when they call me from town and they say, do you want to be a hero? I'm just going to tell them no, right? Or he can decide that, maybe I want to get a group of people, storm the Capitol, that's a little bit of a loaded phrase. But you understand what I mean, right? Like, actually, these people shouldn't be in charge because they're abusers, right?
There's a very telling moment in the second episode when he comments on how the Capitol was built upon the backs of the indigenous people whose land was stolen, right?
Yeah. They're like enslaved, and they live as second-class citizens.
But, and here's the critical thing, 1, it never comes up again, because Redo of Healer doesn't actually care about indigenous people's rights. Indigenous people's rights is just an excuse Redo of Healer uses to justify fucking over the nobility of this city, right? Which is really fucked up because it's very important, and like, as we know in the real world, the indigenous people, especially of the Americas, had their land stolen and have not gotten it back, and they are still currently facing the ongoing effects of American imperialism, colonialism, and, settler colonialism, right? All of that is still in place. But perhaps even more importantly, a little bit less importantly, the protagonist doesn't move to liberate these people and make the world a better place for everyone. He moves to make the world a better place for himself.
He also buys a slave. He just the show is talking about like how awful how they put all these indigenous people into slavery, and then 2 episodes later he just buys one, you know. and he says, like, well, we need someone who does everything I say exactly the way I say it all of the time, because we can't trust anyone else, blah blah blah. If you've read any of my Shield Hero things, you'll know that this is par for the course for how these shows usually go. They create an atmosphere where, like, everyone is like an irrationally terrible person for no reason. No one can be trusted, and so therefore you can only trust people who you directly control, right? Like, why does not to keep bringing back Shield Hero, because I recognize that, like, maybe a lot of you haven't, like, seen it.
Good.
But
Don't.
Yeah, don't. But one thing that Shield Hero does is it has its slave character, Raftalia. She's freed from slavery, but she chooses to become a slave again, which okay. I've written about this already. It's bad because, like, no, you can't choose to become a slave. Like, you can't choose to, like, give up your autonomy and freedom. That's not, like, a fair choice. She, as a discriminated member of society, her options are literally be a slave with this one person and get fed and treated well, or, like, live on the street and be harassed and die. So it's not like a choice that she's making between, like, being a slave or not, right? But the second thing is the way it's framed. When Raftalia decides she wants to be a slave, it's framed as Raftalia proving to Naofumi that she can be trusted, because she's willing to submit herself completely to his will. And she trusts him to not use that power in a way that is bad. And the only positive male-female relationships in Shield Hero are ones where essentially the girl accepts that she has to submit to Naofumi. So likewise, with Redo of Healer, you have these characters like, for example, Princess Flare, who's like the princess who abuses him in a past life. After she gets her memories wiped by the protagonist, she becomes Freya, who is like his personal servant, who he makes her believe that she loves him and will do anything for him, and is completely devoted to him. And she says yes. She's also a lot less intelligent. This is something that I noticed when I was talking with a couple other people, but like she's like noticeably less like cunning, right? And sexually too, which is the other thing. Sexually too, she's a lot less intimidating. She just kind of like, okay, this is gonna be a weird point, but I do think it's important. I do think it's an important thing to understand. So, a lot of the sex scenes in Redo. So Redo is like it's sexually explicit, unlike Shield Hero. Redo is sexually explicit. So a lot of the sex scenes in Redo of Healer are from when the protagonist was being abused, and in those scenes we have a lot of the time it's the princess being like sexually aggressive. Like, she initiates things. She makes the protagonist do things that she doesn't want to do, that he doesn't want to do. There's this one really outrageous part where she kicks the dude in the balls and then just like laughs at him, right? And if you want to compare that to that Flare to Freya, and the way that she kind of just she kind of lets the protagonist just kind of like fuck her however she wants. Like, she's very much just submissive in bed, right? And so you overall get the impression that both in terms of sexuality and in terms of like general power dynamics, the only stable relationship that does not result in abuse between men and women is one in which men are in charge. Like if women are in charge in the bedroom, then men get raped, right? And if women are in charge politically, then men get beaten. So men must be in charge both politically and sexually, right? And it's very, very similar to this idea of like with Raftalia and Naofumi of just how Raftalia being like the only good woman in the series because she decides to be a slave for him. It's a very, very similar ideology. I would say that like literally the only difference is that like Redo likes the state a lot more than Shield Hero does. But culturally, it's the same ideology, exactly the same. And economically too, of course. Yeah. Oh, right. The industry. Just real quick. It's kind of because Kadokawa produced both Shield Hero and Redo Hero, right? Yeah, Kadokawa produces a lot of shit. So it's not. I'm not necessarily saying that like Kadokawa has a track record of just like being on the production committees of like all these bad shows. But what I am saying is that, regardless of like what we think about it, and regardless of its obvious many flaws, financially speaking, Shield Hero was a success. And the manufactured outrage that comes out of these fucking right-wing anime YouTube channels, I guess both here and in Japan, it generates like revenue. And it generates revenue that companies want to start chasing. Like, I've detailed some of the similarities between Redo and Shield Hero here. And I will detail more when I actually write about the show, like formally. But like side by side, they are very similar shows. Like the only difference is that Shield Hero is like 2 cores, and Redo is 1. And obviously Redo has sex scenes, whereas Shield Hero doesn't. But like structurally, they're basically the same show, right? And so we are kind of entering an era, I think, where shows are kind of, companies are like perfecting the art of like the edgy anime, right? Like they're perfecting the art of like shows that justify slavery and abuse, just because it generates outrage and it generates clicks. And these fucking shows, they make anime spaces unsafe. They make society worse. There's not a lot we can do to like make them stop, because obviously like the levers of capitalism are more than just like we can't crumble them with like a tweet or whatever. But it is a trend to keep in mind if you're an anime fan. And when you see like the next fucking Redo or the next fucking Shield Hero, just know that it's all like fucking fake bullshit just to make money. It's not. Redo of Healer could have stayed in this dude's fucking personal journal, alright? He's got serious issues. He fucking hates gay people. Whatever. Keep that to your goddamn self, right? Like, it didn't need to escalate to an entire anime that got made, okay? It didn't. Nobody likes the show. Nobody who defends it actually points out what they like about it. Like we mentioned before, they just use it to make all our spaces just more awful, right? Just more terrible all the way. We have a new president. Boo-doo-doo-doo, it's Joseph Biden. Oh boy, I can't wait for. Okay, I'm not going to be facetious. We have Joe Biden as president, as you know, and I just wanted to take a little bit of a moment to highlight some of the things that we. Excuse me. So I just want to take a little bit of a moment to highlight some of the things that we haven't necessarily seen covered in, like, I guess, the mainstream media, right? We have, for example, on his inauguration, they were anarchists and communists protesting the continued existence of ICE and its for-profit concentration camps at the U.S. border, which Joe Biden despite promising he would end the policy of family separation, and so on and so forth, has not actually done. It's actually looking like he wants to regulate and manage them more than get rid of them, which is a problem.
Yep.
Yeah. We have, for example, his entire cabinet, which we've talked about before, which are all basically just many people who have spent decades and decades in the Clinton administration, the Obama administration, as the architects of some of the worst domestic and foreign policy decisions on the planet. He is like not ideal. I suppose he's better than the actual fascist who incited a coup attempt that we saw not too long ago. But that's not
where we should be setting the bar.
And I would be highly skeptical of anyone who insists on setting the bar at not being a fascist who does coups.
Mm-hmm.
That's incredibly dishonest. But if you are just looking at the mainstream media, if you are just looking at like CNN, MSNBC, blah, 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 all you're hearing about Joe Biden is how he's finally presidential, how we finally have a press secretary who won't tell lies. I mean, it's her job to lie. She will lie. The media admitting...
We've already seen that with the way they have been. And this is the simplest example of the way people are talking about the stimulus check.
Oh, right.
And it went from, we will get you $2,000 checks as soon as possible to, we will get you
$1,400 checks to supplement the $600.
Well, we will get you stimulus checks as soon as possible to, we will get you $2,000 checks as soon as we win Georgia to, we're giving you $1,400 stimulus checks to supplement the $600, and it's all just completely facetious.
Right.
And of course...
And the insistence, by the way, like the insistence on bipartisanship, on this issue and others, like the Democrats insist that they want things to be passed with bipartisan support, even though they control the legislature and the presidency. Right? They have the votes to just pass $2,000, but they want to compromise with Republicans anyway. Why? They say it's for unity. When the reality of the situation, as it's always been, is that the Democrats need the Republican Party. They need them as an excuse because they don't want to do any of the things that they're telling you about. They know that if they tell you that they want to do something that you want, and then they use the Republicans as an excuse for why they're not doing it, they can continue to get you to vote for them. But the reason why I wanted to bring up politics a little bit is that I took some time and I re-listened to all of Hamilton. And I wanted to go over real quickly, I guess, some thoughts on the ideology, I suppose, of Joe Biden. He had that black female speechwriter write about how like history has its eyes on us and how, blah, blah, blah. Something Hamilton quote, something, right? Why do the libs love Hamilton so much? This is a question. It's a genuine, earnest question. Because at its core, I'm not going to go into too much about like the historical inaccuracies of Hamilton. A, because I haven't done the research too much, and B, because I think it's a little bit more useful to see Hamilton more as like a myth that is like fiction written with characters.
It's more useful to see Hamilton as propaganda.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, why do the libs love Hamilton so much? In theory, what Hamilton is a story about a revolutionary who creates a new society on top of the old, and it actually is about two, right? Who kind of cross paths in different ways and have fundamental disagreements about like whether or not to stand for ideals or pragmatically take stances and wait to see who wins. And then in the end, standing for ideals wins over pragmatism, right? But like libs are the opposite of that, right? Libs fucking love compromise and pragmatism and just saying whatever is convenient to win, right? That's what they do. They don't want to defund the police because they're concerned about messaging. You know, they don't want to do, they'll say 2,000 checks or 1,400 checks right away or in April or whatever, you know, because they want to be realistic, you know. They're not going to do the Green New Deal. They're not going to do Medicare for all. They're not going to do any of these policies that everyone objectively likes because they're just kind of standing wherever is convenient, right? And revolution, liberals, revolution, really, like they don't like any of this stuff, right? But why do they so closely relate with Hamilton? Well, because the context of Hamilton being a story about the founding of the United States is kind of what makes a difference, right? Hamilton, by existing as like a history piece, it can sort of make the argument that the American Revolution was cool, but then we made the perfect country, and no changes need to be made since. I mean, obviously there were some changes in terms of like, you know, like abolishing slavery and getting women the right to vote and blah, 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 and maybe not genociding. Actually, he doesn't even mention Native American genocide. That's a shame. But like all the other stuff that we've done wrong and stuff like that. But like the reason why the American system is so great is because built into the system is the mechanism to solve all of these problems, right? And so what Hamilton wants you to do is it wants you to imagine yourself as part of the history of the people who built this incredibly perfect and amazing system, right? It's not always nice, you know, like no one wants to know how the sausage gets made, like as Aaron Burr says, right? But it is ultimately as good as it gets, and you should be proud of being part of a tradition that has made such a wonderful and successful society, right? That's why the liberals fucking love it. I guess the last thing I want to say about Hamilton is I was talking to a couple black people who I know about Hamilton, who have also either seen or listened to it, and I couldn't help but like notice their like frustration at the existence of Hamilton, because specifically because of the audience of like upper income like white people who like get to go to see it in person, and the Hamilton fandom online is a little bit more diverse, but the people who see it in theaters and who like think about Hamilton as like this great American epic of like this and that, like it's definitely upper.
It's definitely something to be said about Hamilton and the recuperation of hip hop.
Yeah. So first of all, there were black people involved in the American Revolution. So the idea that you would take white people and cast them with black actors before you would write a story about the black people who were involved in the American Revolution speaks volumes. So that's like the first thing. Second thing, and more importantly, a lot of these like upper middle class like white people fucking hate rap and they hate hip hop, right? And they think these things are the reason why black people aren't getting ahead in the country, not, you know, like the 300 years of fucking systemic violence against African people, both here and abroad, right? But they suddenly start to think, you know, rap isn't that bad, hip hop isn't that bad, only when black culture is like molded and shaped into like a propaganda weapon that like glorifies the wonders and the virtues of American society, right? Like only when black culture falls entirely in line with hegemony do white people say, "Oh yeah, this is cool. Have you heard Hamilton? Maybe this rap thing is pretty cool."
Hey, didn't we say something about this in our previous episode when we talked about the way anime fans treat women?
Oh, yeah. We did, didn't we?
See, this isn't just a completely unrelated tangent about something not related to anime.
It comes back. It works in every medium.
Back to this the whole time. We were saying this last episode, if you haven't heard it, and about how, or was it the episode? It was last episode.
Frank's episode, right?
About how there are weebs who, it was the Dark and Black episode.
Right.
We talked about here.
Right, the one before.
Fuck that guy.
It wasn't the live episode.
But anyway, yeah, it wasn't the live. Anyway, we talked about how in a lot of anime spaces, they're like, oh, well, we accept minorities as long as they conform to hegemony. And we see this in basically every, I want to say, reactionary space. And I'm including liberal spaces especially here because they're so reactionary. But, like, it is the conditional acceptance of marginalized people not on their own terms, but on the terms that they conform to hegemonic power structures, or what is quote-unquote expected of them.
Exactly. And so, whether it's liberal, I don't care what kind of liberalism you are, whether it's like social democracy, whether it's like social liberal, or whether it's conservative, neoconservative, neoliberal, whatever. At the end of the day, this sort of recuperation is their fucking bread and butter. When they talk about unity, when they talk about like coming together as a nation to heal the divide, what they want is for you to like get in line. Luckily for us, I suppose, in heavy scare quotes, the last major thing that happened was a bunch of fascists flew like Nazi and Confederate flags in the middle of the Capitol, and they threatened to kill a bunch of people, right? And so people are, for now, saying, well, all these right-wing extremists need to like unify. But in the end, when we try to make moves, when we try to demand what is rightfully ours from the government and from the system, they will look at us and they'll say, why are you being so disunifying? You know, why don't you want to come together with us? It is the ideology of Hamilton. It's the ideology of terrible anime fans. It's the ideology of politicians. To say, oh, of course, America accepts all, you know, colors, races, religions, regardless of gender orientation, blah, 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 blah. You know, as long as you conform to the fundamental principles of this country, which are, we're in charge and you're not, fuck you, right? That's the Constitution.
Yeah, or if we even look at, like, for example, trans people, right? It's in a lot of popular spaces. We accept trans people as long as they conform to like very conventional gender standards of what we expect trans people to be, as opposed to like, you know, all of the different variations and expressions of gender there are.
Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Next segment. Okay. We are almost done here, but we wanted to make a special announcement about this podcast. It's guests. We're trying to find a couple of people who have either expressed interest in coming on the podcast, or we think may be interested in coming on the podcast to talk about things. But after that, we would like to continue to have guests on podcasts because guests are cool. So if you have an anime or anime culture related idea or specialty that you're into, it
doesn't even have to really be anime. Like at this point, I
like
think
we just talked about Hamilton. Like,
we'll gladly talk about politics because, of course, politics influences our lives. There was a really good tweet I saw a while ago about how like we need to put the same amount of critical thinking skills we do into figuring out who would beat who in an anime fight into like working towards collective liberation. I think about that a lot.
Yeah. Just as long as if you've seen a couple of these episodes, I think you have a good feeling of like the kind of stuff that would work in our podcast. So anyway, if you send us a DM on Twitter or in our Discord, you should have already seen the link for that, which is in the description of wherever you're listening to this to.
Yeah.
You can tell us like your name, what you prefer to be called, the thing that you want to do, I guess, like the thing that you want to talk about with. And
I want to add that, in fact, we encourage you to talk about things, to bring up ideas that we wouldn't normally talk about, because our goal is to create a left-wing anime space, but the two of us have very limited perspectives in the sort of things we have gone through in our lives and the sort of things we are generally experienced with and talk about. So,
right. I mean, Rago and I grew up together for the most part in the same neighborhood, and then we went to the same schools. We don't have exactly the same tastes and everything, but our tastes are really, really, really similar. And we're not like the exact same flavor of communists, but we literally both became communists at like around the same time. Right? We radicalized each other.
It was very funny.
Yeah. We both, I remember that. We were like talking one day.
First.
Yeah, you were definitely radicalized before me. But like, we were kind of talking and we're like, isn't capitalism kind of like not great? I don't like it. You're like, yeah, it sucks.
I remember back when I called myself a leftist because I didn't want to be associated with socialists. I was so cringe.
I remember when I actively held reactionary opinions, and I don't want to remember it. I wish I could just erase that part of my history, to be honest. But I mean, I guess past me was good enough to eventually become present me, so maybe he doesn't get nuked. Okay, but anyway, the point is, we have a kind of narrow breadth of things that we're like good at talking about. So if there's something that would fit on the podcast, but maybe isn't necessarily in our lane, let us know. And we can't make any promises, but if it'll work, we will commit to an actual promise to get on a Discord call and record together.
Yeah, and we will also obviously if you want more details or talk about what this entails, stuff like compensating you for your labor, because I don't know.
Oh yeah,
we're doing our best. We can always work that out, and we're just doing things and stuff, and it would be cool if there were other people doing things and stuff with us.
Yeah, I think that's the end of the episode. It should be a little stuffed, a little chonky, but I think y'all deserve it for sticking with us and welcoming us back in 2021. If you like the show, make sure to follow me and Raghava on Twitter. Our links are in the description. You can also join our Discord. It's like the third time now that you're gonna say it, but please do. It's fun. It's cozy. I treat the Discord like the Twitter, but like more informal. So if you want to talk to me about stuff and you want to talk to Raghava about stuff, you can just be in there. I also do a lot of we do a lot of political stuff that doesn't necessarily like fit in tweets, right? So there's that. And it's also just a space, like, if you need help with something, if you want a community, if you're like a content creator and you're looking for like new people to like give your stuff to, there's like good place to network. I know like a couple of people in there are like starting a podcast as well. You'll of course hear about it on my Twitter when they release it. And if you want to help us continue to afford our hosting service, and if you just like what we're doing in general, you can donate to the Patreon. Yeah, cool. That being said, my name is Mo Black. My pronouns are he, him, and his.
I'm not going to pronounce anything other than he or she, as I'm very tired.
Yeah, me too. See ya.
See ya.